On the way to a family reunion in Mexico, my grandmother went stark white and commanded, "Stop the car." "Turn around." My grandmother's hands were trembling as she handed me a plastic bag in the front seat of my truck. When I looked inside, my blood ran cold, and in that moment, I knew I would never see my parents the same way again. Before that day, my life was simple. My name is Marco, and for the last 7 years, I've been a mechanic, the owner of a small garage on the outskirts of Flagstaff, Arizona. My world is the smell of engine oil and the clatter of tools. But the story I'm about to tell isn't about the man I am now. It's about the person I was 7 years ago, when a single, life-changing trip revealed a side of my family I never knew existed. I grew up in a Mexican-American family where tradition was everything, or so I was told. My parents, Mateo and Adriana, lived in a lavish home in Scottsdale, a world of golf courses and swimming pools. My father inherited a construction company from my grandfather, Julio, and my mother, with her gentle demeanor, was the sharp, calculating mind who managed their wealth. And then there was me. From a young age, I was the odd one out, a stranger in my own home. My parents wanted me to follow in their footsteps, to take over the family business, but all I ever wanted to do was take things apart and fix them with my own hands. I liked the feeling of independence, of building my own life without the weight of the Navarro name or the family's money. For my parents, that made me a failure, a blemish on their perfect picture. I still remember my father shouting at me at dinner one night, "You can't live like a mechanic your whole life." I just bowed my head, swallowed the words I wanted to say, and left the table. After high school, I moved out, got my technical degree, and found work in Flagstaff. I rarely went home. Not because I didn't want to, but because every time I did, I felt the coldness in my parents' eyes. They never said it out loud, but I knew they were ashamed of me. The only person in the family who truly saw me was my grandmother, Beatriz. She lived with my parents, as Mexican tradition expects children to care for their elders, but I could feel a silent, invisible distance between her and my parents. There was something I never fully understood about their relationship. Whenever I visited, she would pull me aside to her small flower garden in the backyard. "Marco, you're just like your grandfather," she'd say, her voice warm and steady. He too liked to do things himself. Those words were a balm to my soul, but they also made me sad. If I was like him, why did my parents see me as a failure? I started to pick up on little things. I'd overhear fragments of arguments about my grandfather's estate, the land in Mexico, the shares in the company, the house, that he had left entirely to her. It was a thorn in my parents' side. I could feel the tension whenever the topic came up. "You should think about the future, about dividing the assets fairly," my father once said, his voice calm but laced with intent. My grandmother would only smile, but I saw a fleeting sadness in her eyes. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to live my life free from the weight of their expectations. But deep down, I always felt a sense of not belonging, of not being truly loved. Then one autumn afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was gentle, but I knew immediately something was wrong. "Marco, I need you to come home this weekend," she said. I asked her what was going on, but she just said, "Come home and we'll talk," then hung up. I stood in my garage, a sense of unease creeping into my heart. I had no idea that trip home would change everything. I drove to Scottsdale, bracing myself for whatever was coming. My grandmother was the one who opened the door, her kind smile easing my tension. My parents, on the other hand, offered no hugs, no warm wishes. My father just gave a single nod and returned to his paper. I felt more like a guest than a son. They told me they wanted to talk about my grandmother's future, about her assets. My mother's voice was sweet, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. "Your grandmother isn't young anymore," she said. "We just want to make sure everything is arranged properly for the good of the family." I looked at my grandmother, sitting in the corner, her hands clasped tightly. Her fingers trembled, and I knew something was very wrong. A few weeks after that visit, my mother called again. "Marco, can you arrange to take a few days off soon?" she asked, her voice tinged with a strange urgency. She said my father was too busy to go, and she wanted me to take my grandmother to the family reunion in Mexico. I paused for a moment, thinking of my grandmother and the sadness in her eyes. "All right," I said. I'll take her. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit that subscribe button. More unbelievable stories are on the way. On the day of the trip, my parents said goodbye with that same chilling coldness. My father said, "Be careful on the road." And my mother smiled a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. We got in my old pickup and started the long drive. The music my grandmother loved played on the radio, and she started telling me stories about my grandfather, how he was stubborn but loved his family. He always said, "Marco, money doesn't matter as long as we have each other." Then her voice grew quieter, and she said, "I've been feeling tired lately, not tired from age but tired in my heart." She trailed off, staring out the window, and I gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding. We passed a few more towns, and then, as if a sudden jolt of adrenaline had gone through her, she turned to me with wide, panicked eyes and whispered, "Stop the car. Turn around now." I was stunned. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking. "What's wrong, Grandma?" She said nothing, just reached into the small green suitcase at her feet, pulled out a plastic bag, and handed it to me. I looked inside. The bag contained a stack of legal documents and a small, worn photograph of my grandfather. It was my parents' entire scheme laid bare. They had never intended for me to take her to a family reunion. They wanted me to take her to a lawyer's office, just across the border in Mexico, to trick her into signing over the land and the company assets, finally taking what they believed was theirs. My grandmother had known all along. She had planned this escape. She had packed the very documents they wanted her to sign away. She wasn't just tired. She was terrified, and she had been waiting for the right moment. I never saw them the same way again. I have to ask, what would you have done in my place? Knowing what I knew then, would you have turned the car around? The most terrifying moment of my life didn't happen in a dark alley. It happened on a quiet mountain road, when I realized the flat tire on my truck wasn't an accident, and that the drugs found inside were a trap set by my own family. It all started with a simple road trip. "Grandma, if something's wrong, you have to tell me," I pleaded, my voice full of concern. She just smiled, but it was a sad, tired smile. "I know, dear, but for now just let me enjoy this trip with you." We were on our way to Mexico, a journey she had been dreading. I knew something was wrong. She just wouldn't tell me what. We pulled into a tiny gas station near the border to refuel. As I went inside for water and chips, she sat on a bench outside, watching the trucks go by. When I came back out, she was holding a crumpled old photo of my grandfather next to his vintage truck. "This was your grandfather when he first started the company," she said, her voice soft with a mix of love and sorrow. "You're just like him, Marco. You don't like depending on anyone." The words hit me hard, a lump forming in my throat. I smiled and said, "I'm not as good as him." She just took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You're better than you think." That next part of the trip was smoother. But as we got closer to the mountainous border region, the sky turned dark. The roads were narrow, winding through rocky cliffs and a sparse pine forest. I drove slowly, cautiously, my grandmother growing quieter with every mile. I wanted to ask her about what she'd hinted at earlier, about my parents, but I didn't want to upset her. I just prayed this trip would lift her spirits. And then, as we navigated a sharp, blind curve on that deserted road, the truck suddenly jolted. A sharp pop rang out. I felt the vehicle lurch violently to the right. "Damn it," I muttered, pulling over. I already knew. A flat tire. "Are you okay, dear?" my grandmother asked, her voice laced with worry. "It's fine, Grandma," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Just a flat. I'll have it changed in no time." I got out and went to the back right wheel. The tire was completely shredded, a gaping gash in the sidewall. I sighed, grabbed my tools, and started to work under the dim glow of my flashlight. My grandmother watched from the passenger window, a worried look on her face. "Be careful, Marco," she said. "Don't you worry, Grandma," I said, trying to reassure her with a smile. "I do this every day." But then she spoke again, her voice trembling in a way that made me stop what I was doing. "Marco, come here and look at this." I wiped the sweat from my forehead and walked over to her side of the truck. She was leaning down toward the floorboard, holding a clear plastic bag filled with a suspicious white powder. Her eyes were wide with panic, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "What is this, Marco?" she choked out. I took the bag from her, feeling its weight, at least 10 pounds. My mind went blank. It felt like the entire world had just tilted on its axis. "Grandma, where did you find this?" My voice was barely a whisper. She pointed under the seat. "It was here, right under the seat." My heart began to pound in my chest. I took the bag from her hands and saw that it was carefully hidden, tucked deep into a crevice. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. "Grandma, I swear to you this isn't mine," I said, my voice trembling with anger and confusion. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying certainty. "Marco," she whispered, so low I had to lean in to hear. "I don't think this was an accident." Her words hit me like a knife. A chill ran down my spine, not from the cold mountain air, but from the horrifying truth of what she was implying. Was someone trying to set me up? I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I called my mom. "Mom, what's going on? There's a bag of drugs in my truck. Do you know anything about this?" There was a long, cold pause before she answered. Her voice was too surprised, too fake. "Marco, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about that." I demanded to talk to my father, but his voice was eerily calm, colder than ice. "Marco, calm down. It's probably a mistake. Maybe a customer left it at the garage." "A mistake?" I shouted, unable to hold back. "Dad, this wasn't left behind. It was hidden and it's a lot, almost 10 pounds. He just repeated the same line, his voice like a stranger's. "Stay calm. Deal with it and keep going. Don't worry your grandmother." I hung up, my knuckles white from gripping the phone. My grandmother just sat there, head bowed, hands clasped tightly, as if she were holding back a terrible secret. "Grandma, do you know anything?" I pleaded. She shook her head, but her eyes were filled with deep fear. "Marco, I've heard them talking. Your parents. They've been mentioning needing to resolve things about the estate. I think they didn't want me to go to Mexico." Her words felt like a physical blow. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a terrifying picture. My parents, the sudden flat tire, a 10-pound bag of drugs, their cold voices on the phone. Everything suddenly made sense. I tucked the plastic bag into my jacket. "Grandma, I'll finish changing the tire and we'll keep going," I said, my voice firm. "But you have to tell me everything. Everything. By the way, if this story is as unbelievable to you as it was to me, and you're still listening, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories just like this one coming your way." I got back to work on the tire, but my mind was a raging storm. Could they really do something to harm her? Or even me? If we were stopped by the police, if they found this, I'd be arrested and my grandmother would be implicated. The thought made my blood boil. I tightened the bolts with a fury I'd never felt before, channeling all my anger into each turn of the wrench. When the tire was on, I got back in the truck. I looked at my grandmother and made a promise. "Grandma, I don't know what's going on, but I promise I will protect you. If Mom and Dad are doing something, I won't let them win." She took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "I trust you, Marco," she said, her voice trembling. "But from now on, we have to be careful. Very careful." We drove for another hour, reaching a small town just across the border. I found a bus terminal, helped my grandmother buy a ticket, and gave her a tight hug. "I'll come pick you up after the reunion," I said. She held my hand, her eyes full of both worry and steel. "Marco, I'll be waiting for you, but be careful. They're not the parents you once knew." Her words tightened my chest. I watched the bus disappear into the night, carrying my grandmother to safety. I returned to the truck, a wave of loneliness washing over me. I checked the bag in my jacket. It was still there, a grim reminder of the truth I had to face. It was time to go back. The drive back to Scottsdale was long and gave me too much time to think. I recalled small details over the years. How my parents obsessed over my grandmother's estate, how they pressured her to sign papers. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a terrifying picture. They didn't just want control of the estate. They were willing to sacrifice me to get it. The thought filled me with a cold rage. I called an old friend who was a cop, not telling him everything. "Marco, if it's narcotics in a significant amount, You could be looking at years in prison, he said. Near the border, it's even worse. They'll assume you're smuggling. A chill ran down my spine. What if someone planted it? I asked. You'd need proof, he said gravely. Without it, your word means nothing. I parked a few blocks away from my parents' house and crept through the night, a silent, furious ghost. I crouched behind a bush in the backyard, close enough to hear their voices. My parents were arguing, their voices low and tense. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Marco found the bag, my mother said, her voice laced with fear. You said the plan was perfect, but what now? If he realizes it wasn't an accident, we'll lose everything. My blood ran cold. They knew. They were talking about the bag of drugs. My father let out a cold, derisive laugh. Calm down, Adriana. He has no proof. He's just a dumb mechanic. He wouldn't dare do anything. But then his voice lowered, becoming a chilling whisper. If Mom doesn't sign the papers after this, we'll find another way. Another accident? My mother gasped. We've already risked too much. And that's when my father said the most chilling thing I've ever heard. No one will suspect an old woman having a heart attack. She's old. Her health is frail. A dose of medication, a shock. Everyone will think it's natural, and when she's gone, the estate will be ours. I stood there, frozen. Not only had they framed me to pressure my grandmother, but now they were willing to kill her. Rage surged through me, but I knew I had to stay calm. I took a deep breath, walked onto the porch, and knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the night, firm and deliberate. My mother opened the door, her eyes flickering with surprise. Marco, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Mexico with your grandmother. I walked past her into the living room, my voice a blade of ice. I found the bag of drugs in my truck hidden under the passenger seat. Do you know anything about it? My mother's face went pale, but my father stepped forward, his eyes as sharp as knives. Don't accuse us without proof, he said, his voice a low growl. If you do, don't blame us for being ruthless. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I heard everything. About the drugs. About your plan to hurt your own mother. My mother gasped, but my father just laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You think you're clever, don't you? You're nothing. A failed mechanic living off the family's money. His words were a punch to the gut, but I didn't back down. If I'm nothing, I said, why did you need to frame me? My mother burst out. Because we had no choice, Marco. The company is going bankrupt. Your grandmother is holding on to the entire estate, and she won't give us a cent. My father snapped at her to be quiet, but it was too late. I pulled out my phone, still recording. Thank you, Mom, I said, holding it up. I needed exactly those words. My mother froze, stunned, while my father lunged at me. I dodged and pushed him away. Family, I said, my voice shaking with fury. You destroyed it long ago. I'm not your son anymore. I walked out of that house and got back in my truck. I drove away from Scottsdale that night and never looked back. The road was pitch black, but in my heart, the darkness was even thicker. I drove away a son without parents, but a grandson with a purpose. I really want to know what you think. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Tell me in the comments below. The night I discovered my parents' secret, my world didn't just fall apart. It shattered. It's a feeling I'll never forget. A crushing mix of betrayal and pure, unadulterated anger. They were plotting against my own grandmother, my sweet, kind, and loving grandmother. The moment I heard their voices, my stomach dropped. They were talking about drugs, about forcing her to sign over her estate, about hurting her. The anger that boiled in my chest was so intense I could barely breathe. I had to get out, and I had to protect her. So I grabbed the phone, recorded everything, and sent it to my friend Javier with a single desperate message. Javier, I have proof. Keep it safe for me. I'm going to Mexico to find my grandmother. He replied almost instantly, Marco, are you okay? I'll keep the recording safe, but don't do anything reckless. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I was okay, but I knew I couldn't stop. The pain and fury still burned, but they were fueling me. I drove through the night across Arizona's deserts, heading south. My mind was a whirlwind of their cold words, their plans, their cruelty. They saw me as nothing more than a pawn. For years, I had thought that despite their coldness and lack of understanding, they were still family. But as I drove, I realized that family isn't about blood. It's about who's willing to protect you, and the only person in my family who had ever truly done that for me was my grandmother. Dawn was breaking when I reached the small village in Sonora. Red dirt roads cut through a sea of cornfields and cacti, leading to the heart of a village where my distant relatives lived. The Navarro family reunion was in full swing, with mariachi music filling the air, and the smell of tacos and tamales drifting from a large ranch. But I felt no joy. I just wanted to find her. My eyes scanned the crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins I'd only met a handful of times. I saw her sitting on a wooden chair in a corner of the yard, next to a patch of wildflowers. She looked so small and fragile, so vulnerable. "Grandma," I called softly, sitting beside her. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, and she grabbed my hand, squeezing it so tightly, as if she was afraid I'd vanish. "Marco, you're here. I was so worried. Where did you go?" I smiled, trying to hide the surge of emotions, but she saw right through me. "What happened, Marco? You don't look okay." I took a deep breath, and the words just tumbled out. "Grandma, I went back to Mom and Dad's house. I overheard them talking about the drugs, about how they want to force you to sign papers, and they're planning to hurt you next." My grandmother froze, her hand trembling in mine. But her eyes showed no surprise, just a profound, heartbreaking sadness. "I suspected as much," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I didn't want to believe it. They're my son and my daughter-in-law. How could they?" My eyes stung with tears as I held her hand tighter. "Grandma, I recorded what they said. I have proof. I won't let them hurt you. I promise." She looked at me, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Marco, you don't have to do this for me. You've already suffered enough." But I shook my head, my voice firm. "No, Grandma. I'm doing this because you're the only one in this family who truly cares about me." She wiped her tears away, and in her eyes, I saw that familiar resilience I'd always admired. "Marco, listen to me," she said, her voice soft but powerful. "You've done so much already. You've protected me. Now let yourself rest a little. Don't let this weigh on your heart." She gestured to the people around us, to the laughter and music. "Forget those two people, at least for today. You deserve to be happy, Marco. By the way, if you're still with me on this wild ride, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty more stories like this to share." I looked at her, and a lump formed in my throat. Her words were like a cool breeze, easing the burning anger in my heart. "Grandma, how can I be happy knowing they're plotting against you?" I asked, but she just shook her head, placing a hand on my cheek. "Marco, if you let pain control you, you'll miss the beautiful moments. I don't want to see you live in anger." She smiled, and I felt my defenses crumble. "Let me see your smile, like when you were little, chasing me around for tamales." I couldn't help but laugh, and just like that, the weight lifted. "You always know how to make me smile." She pulled me to my feet. "Then get up, Marco. Come with me. Eat some tacos. Dance with your aunts and uncles." And she led me into the heart of the reunion, where my Aunt Rosa immediately rushed over and hugged me tight. "Marco, my little boy is here. It's been too long." For the first time, I felt a genuine warmth spread through me. I sat at a table, eating spicy tacos, laughing when the salsa nearly made me choke. I talked with Uncle Juan, danced with Aunt Rosa, and felt like I was finally home. Later, when the music slowed, I pulled my grandmother onto the dance floor. "I'm too old, Marco. I can't dance." But I didn't let go. "Too old. You dance better than me." I took her hand, leading her in a slow, gentle sway. Her silver hair fluttered in the night breeze as she laughed. And in that moment, there were no parents, no schemes, no betrayal. There was only me and my grandmother, finding peace amid laughter and music. I knew that night was just a brief escape. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with her by my side, I wasn't afraid. A few days later, we said our goodbyes and began the long drive to Flagstaff. We arrived in Scottsdale first, needing to face my parents one last time. As we stood outside the house, I asked her if she wanted to wait in the truck, but she shook her head, her eyes resolute. "No, Marco, I'm coming with you. I want them to know I'm not afraid. My mother opened the door, her surprise quickly turning to wariness. Marco, Beatrice, you're back already? I stepped inside, my voice firm. We're here to get Grandma's things. She's not staying here anymore. My parents looked shocked and then angry, but my grandmother stepped forward, her gaze sharp. Matteo, Adriana, I stayed here because I thought you needed me. But I was wrong. You needed my money. Marco is the only one who truly cares about me, and I'm going with him. The room went silent. Don't say another word, Adriana, my grandmother said, cutting my mother off. I know everything. I'm disappointed but not surprised. My father stepped forward, his voice a low growl. Mom, you can't do this. That estate belongs to the family. But my grandmother just glared at him. The one who truly loves me is standing right here, and it's not you. We quickly packed her things, and as we were leaving, I looked back at them one last time. Don't try to contact us, I said, my voice cold. If you do anything to Grandma, I'll take that recording to court. My mother went pale, and my father clenched his fists, but they didn't dare act. We left Scottsdale as the sun set, a fiery red glow on the horizon, leaving behind a chapter of my life I hoped never to revisit. The next few months were the most peaceful I had ever experienced. My grandmother turned my small Flagstaff house into a true home. She planted a garden, and every morning I'd see her watering her roses, humming old Mexican songs. The years flew by, and I stayed vigilant. Javier still had the recording, and I had a lawyer on retainer. My grandmother was safe, but I knew she was growing weaker. One night, as we ate tamales she'd made, she took my hand, her eyes gentle. Marco, I know my time is running out, but I'm happy because I have you. I forced a smile, my heart heavy, but she just shook her head. I've lived enough, Marco, and I've prepared everything. I didn't understand what she meant until a few months later, when she passed away peacefully in my arms. A week later, Mr. Garcia, my lawyer, called me to his office. Marco, Beatrice left a will, he said, handing me a stack of documents. I opened them, my heart pounding. My grandmother had left everything to me. The house in Scottsdale, the land in Mexico, and a substantial savings account. She had drawn up the will 3 years ago. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of, Mr. Garcia said softly. Not long after, my parents showed up, standing at my doorstep, demanding to sue for the estate. That's the family's, Marco, my mother screamed. You have no right to keep it all. I just looked at them, my voice cold and firm. Grandma made her choice, and you know why. If you want to sue, go ahead. I have the recording, and I'll take it to court. They went pale, said nothing, and turned away. I knew they wouldn't dare. My grandmother's will was ironclad, and they had no chance of winning. I didn't rejoice over the money or the land. I sold the Scottsdale house and used the money to expand my garage and build a community center in Flagstaff. I named a small coffee shop in my garage Beatrice's Corner. I just felt a deep sense of peace knowing I'd kept my promise. Every morning, I water the roses in her garden, and I feel like she's still here. I'm still learning from this story, even years later. It taught me that a person's true value isn't in what they own, but in what they're willing to sacrifice for others. I'm curious to know, what would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below.